As more and more people crawl past that wonderful level 50 mark, there is one question that I keep hearing from new players. When should I start doing dungeons? I, of course, mean veteran dungeons, because why would you do a level 20 dungeon at level 50? That'd be weird. Why would you even do that? And this is a totally valid question in Wildstar, because dungeons are challenging. There's a lot that goes into these things, and being geared to go into them sometimes isn't even enough to take them down. They're hard, but they're also super rewarding, with awesome loot at the end. And, of course, that wicked feeling of taking down a badass boss. Well, let's drop a little bit of knowledge about how Wildstar does its dungeon bosses. First, Wildstar really focuses on mechanical complexity when it comes to bosses, and instead of numerical difficulty. And what the fuck were those words that I just fucked in? Well, if you want an idea of the two concepts, a boss with numerical difficulty is one that, say, hits you extremely hard in the face. And the only really way to trivialize that is to increase your armor or your health and make sure that your numbers are higher. A boss that requires special tactics to overcome, say, a boss that requires you knock off certain parts of its body in order to reveal a weak spot, that's mechanical complexity. They're much different. One requires more strategy than the other one requires more min-maxing focus. I guess it's kind of like a micro versus macro. Stupid metaphors aside, you get what I'm talking about. To use some World of Warcraft examples, numerical difficulty is patchwork. He hits your tanks really, really, really hard, and your DPS needs to be able to pull the numbers to beat him before he goes into his enrage. It's all about numbers. Mechanical complexity is more like Hygen the Unclean, where you have to dance around his stupid floor for, like, fucking ever. Seriously, it's a pain in the ass. The reason I say this is because even with the gear and the runes and being completely prepared, you might get your ass kicked by bosses. Like, a lot. It happens. That's because Wildstar bosses really scale most effectively against knowledge. Knowing how to take them down is probably a really good thing. You're also going to need the gear, and you're going to need the know-how and the rotation and stuff like that. But knowing how to take them down makes them substantially easier. But now I'm talking to you, Mr. I just hit level 50. You're covered in questing gear, and you're ready to go fight Mordecai Redmoon to the death with your crazy laser claws. But take heed, you are not prepared, for there is a number in your head that you must reach. Now, this number can fluctuate a little bit based on, your skill level or your experience, but the magical number that you should work on for gear level is 68. 68 places you high enough that you can really dish out the pain needed and survive the big explosions, and, it's pretty easy to get as well. It probably could only take you a couple of days, maybe even less if you just decide to splurge on crafting gear. It should be more than enough for a Kelvorith or a Stormtalon's Lair, the lowest and easiest of the two dungeons. And while the PvP gear that you've been rolling around in through adventures might be nice for adventures, take that shit off before you go into dungeons, because PvP gear is probably not going to be acceptable there. Yeah, you get the item level, but you're missing a couple of key statistics that make you good. For example, PvP gear tends to lack strike through. Now, strike through for a DPS, and arguably a tank, is like the most important thing. It is like the icing on the cake, and also the cake of the cake. Strike through is like the bomb. Why is strike through so important? Well, because people don't like getting punched in the face. So they're going to try their best to make sure they don't get punched in the face in a situation where getting punched in the face is something that might really happen to them. Deflect chance is nasty on dungeon mobs, and when you're a DPS, this seems obvious. If you're not hitting something, you're not damaging it, and therefore the D in your name is kind of moot. But it's even more important for tanks, because if, say, the Spell Slinger decides to pull threat on the boss and he starts charging towards him, and you want to taunt back, or just need to taunt for some reason, and the boss deflects your taunt, it's going to be a little real awkward, like 10 seconds while your cooldown goes and your Spell Slinger gets eaten by a giant dragon man. And while PvP gear carries a little bit of strike through, it's generally not really enough to get through, say, a dungeon monster's deflect rating. You generally want around 10% for most classes. And while that's good and all, the PvP power and PvP defense take a lot out of that item budget. Makes it less really effective in dungeons and stuff like that. You have varying mileage, again, based on how good you are at Wildstarring, but I generally recommend getting yourself a PvE set. That little extra edge is always super important. But hey, now you're at item level 68. You've been training and practicing for this day. You're ready to dive into your first dungeon. No, you're not. There is one crucial ingredient remaining for your dungeon kit. And it's something that a lot of people kind of neglect, at least when they're just starting to get into dungeons or just fairly new to the idea, but it's something that is incredibly essential and really needs to be put more of a focus on by Wildstar and Carbine, and that is runes. Runes are insanely important for anybody who wants to dive into dungeons. Tanking, healing, whatever it takes. Runes are ridiculous. Runes are so fucking good, I can't even... You know what? They are like the best god... You know what? I don't even have a metaphor for this. To put it somewhat numerically, a piece of gear might have, say, 200 total stats to various secondary stats that's on it. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. Depends on the piece of gear. They also come with a certain number of rune slots. Green items can come with up to 2, blue items with 3, purple items with 4, and awesome legendaries can have up to 5. Now, the item itself might carry, say, 200 and some stat points across the whole item over 3 different statistics. Each individual rune you put into an item also carries roughly 200 for an item level 50 rune. 269 for an item level 80 rune. That means for each of those 3 slots, you have as many secondary stats as the whole item. And now that things like assault power and support power aren't really part of the equation, they're just really literally tied to your own item level, these secondary stats are extremely important. Hitting 10% strike through is super easy when you consider that you can really just slap on a whole bunch of runes and make it even better. Piles of multi-hit up to the soft cat of 50%, crit up to 30%, it becomes a lot easier to hit these metrics, like deflect for tanks, when you're just slapping runes in there. Not only that, but there's also fusion runes that instead of giving you stats, give you a cool ability. My medic's got one. It causes a space ghost to appear whenever I heal somebody, and the space ghost floats around looking for people who are hurt, like, I'm gonna heal you, I'm a spooky space ghost. It's friggin' great. Runes have such a massive impact on how your character plays and your performance, because you're getting a vast majority of your secondary stats from it, and it allows you to really customize how those stats are given to you. If you need a lot of multi-hit, you can get a lot of multi-hit from water runes. You can even change the rune slot type with service tokens, which I swear to God, Carbine just throws them at your face for logging in most days. Rune slots come in one of 6 elements, just like everything else in this fucking game, and each element is tied to certain stats, very similar to how circuit board crafting works. The difference is you can actually change what element each slot is for a small service token fee, or just reroll at random for gold, and try and get more optimal setups for your character. For dungeons, though, you probably don't need to do this much unless you're looking to hit a specific hard cap, like deflect rating for tanks, or strike through for DPS. But for the love of God, put runes in your gear. It's amazing how many people I see going into dungeons and how many times I pug into a group where people just don't have runes in their gear. It's not that expensive, and it's so useful. There are so many stats you're getting from runes, it's mind-boggling. You get 3 times as much stats on a regular blue item if you rune it up. That's a huge amount more friggin' stats. Stats are good. More stats equals more punching in face. But now with your item level 68 gear and your plenty of shiny runes, you're ready. Step through the gates of Kel Vorith or Storm Talon's lair, or if you're really feeling suicidal, maybe like Skull Kano or SSM, you probably don't want to touch proto games yet because that's really hard, but you're ready. Dive into dungeons, some of Wildstar's most interesting and engaging content, and kick some bosses' asses, or more likely, get your own ass kicked a whole bunch, and then eventually learn and beat the boss, and then feel really good about yourself and get some shiny epics. Because like me, I'm fairly sure that most of you are in this for the booty. You all have a great one. Hey, it's me, that guy nobody's talking about, the Orange Hatter. What are you doing on November 7th? I better be watching the Orange Hatter's awesome extra live stream where he's going to be playing video games here on YouTube Gaming for 24 straight hours. It's gonna be fun. I'm raising money for the Alberta Children's Hospital because they saved my life once, so I thought I'd pay back with the only marketable skill I have, playing video games and saying stupid crap on the internet. Join me live here on November 7th for 24 hours starting at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. That is 9 a.m. Pacific, or 1 in the afternoon East Coast. I don't fucking know time zones. Featuring live musical performances from The Orange Hatter. Written and directed by The Orange Hatter. And occasional deep revelations caused by entirely lack of sleep of maddening knowledge that cannot be comprehended by the feeble mortal brain of The Orange Hatter. Check it out, November 7th, Alberta Children's Hospital. Cancer research, Extra Life 2015. Be there for the kids.